about.
Okay. These are pieces that were thrown probably yesterday or the day before. You can see they're starting to harden, starting to dry. They've been trimmed. And this is my signature, the fox, and a little other marking that I put on there. So these will go through certain amount of time to where they completely dry. You can see these pieces, which are slightly older. These are still drying, but they're almost dry. So the pieces further back are have to be very careful with them at this point because they are still unfired. These are slightly smaller. And I'll put one of these. These were from last week. These are all little, I call these pouring bowls, but this is the smallest size I make. This is like the largest size I make. These have been fired once, so these will get glazed and fired again. Yeah, you can tell by the sound. And see other sizes here. So there's basically, you're getting to see the different stages, and when I throw, then you'll get to see the original. But these are mugs that would have the two crows on the side. You saw the one with the turtle on. That's what they look like before they're glazed.
Okay.
And but then again, these here, I'll move this out of the way. These all of these pieces that look pink have been have gone through the first firing. They're fired up to about 1900 degrees, but when they get to that point, they have this high-pitched ring, meaning that the clay is starting to turn to stone.
And these are your kilns?
Yeah, these are actually the exact same kiln. They're electric fired. They go up to very high temperature. They go up to 2,360 degrees.
Wow.
They have a digital control on the front. So there is a digital readout. When I'm firing these, it will show exactly what the temperature is and how it's, progressing. This particular kiln here is slightly older than this one. This one is the one I used to do the first firing. This one I will use to do the second firing, where pieces will have the glaze on and the glaze is melted and finished. These pieces right here, these are raku fired. Rare to see these. These were fired during the total solar eclipse. They were designed to be fired that way.
Okay.
There's all sorts of animals and figures in the glaze from that eclipse. So this kiln, like I said, this is probably partially full of things that I'll add to when these are dry. But you'll see stuff stacked here. Once it gets to this point, it's a little more durable, where I can stack pieces together. And then, see, this has that high-pitched sound. And then, as I need them, these will get glazed. These are glazes in these buckets. These are all my own recipe mixtures of glazes. And I have to mix them from different raw materials that are mined in different parts of the world and country. This is my potter's wheel over here. This is what I'll be using to throw. And these are wooden bats that fit on top of the wheel, so I can throw a piece and remove it and throw something else. Of course, I have my music here. I have to listen to music.
That's right.
So,
do you have a certain kind of clay you like to use?
they're basically two clays I'm using now. One is These are all stoneware clays, meaning that they can be fired to very high temperature. One makes a kind of a tan, darker. These have been fired once. These will be eventually glazed, and these will be used for kitchen utensils, to hold kitchen utensils. The other glaze, you see the pieces that are white. That, excuse me, that's not glaze, clay. That is called porcelain. It means the clay is absolutely pure, has no impurities, so it stays white. So these are, I mean, these get fired in the same kiln. The only difference is one is white clay, so it has a different look than the red clay. These boxes here, this is how I get my clay. I buy it from a distributor. It's already mixed. So inside of the boxes there is just a bag or 2 bags of clay.
How long can it sit like that in a box?
As long as it's, I try not to keep it more than like 3 or 4 months, because even with it in plastic bags, it will eventually harden and dry out. This is part of a bag of clay. This is how I get it. These boxes actually contain clay that I have reworked up. You'll see over here, these containers have clay scraps. This is from trimming. And I will eventually mix it up to where it's wet, and then I'll put it on, you see those these plaster bats?
Yeah.
I'll put it out on there and it'll gradually dry, and then I can mix it back up into usable clay.
Okay.
Yeah. So is your battery still up?
Let's see.
If it is, I'll throw. Fall in love with, and I have my own collection here, you can see. The first thing they have to do with clay is it has to be mixed. It's called wedging. And what I'll actually be doing is, I'll just cut a piece out of this. This is just a wire I'm cutting the clay with. The reason for me mixing it, it's actually not called mixing, it's called wedging. And what it's doing is it's mixing up the clay particles to where they're more pliable, and it's also getting rid of bubbles in the clay. The thing that's unique about clay that you need to understand is if you looked at clay under a microscope, it would look like needles that fit together like this. That's why it's sticky, is because of its shape. And this is where my years on the farm come in handy, because this is when I'm doing large amounts of clay, this is very physically demanding. So what I'm doing is I'm wedging, and it's actually bringing any bubbles, if there is any, to the edge, and they will pop. This clay shouldn't have any because it's already been processed, but I still find I have to do this. So,
If you don't, do they explode in the kiln?
well, if you trap air in anything, what happens in the firing is it'll capture steam, because there is always a certain amount of water in clay until it's been fired, and it'll explode. I mean, it'll not like it's going to blow the house up, but I mean it can actually, depending on the size of the air bubble, it can actually explode to where the pot that you've made, and sometimes surrounding pots. That's also a problem if you try firing pottery that is not completely dry. That's a bigger problem. That'll turn to steam. Okay.
I've seen some wheels like this that are big units. Do you like a smaller unit for any reason, or?
Well, this is actually this is an old wheel, and it's very powerful. It has a almost a 1-horse motor with a direct gear driven. So it is so strong I can't stop it. It'll throw me right into the wall, which is done before. The size and shape of most wheels is determined by the manufacturer, and most wheels are like this, to where you can sit down and brace yourself. This is just a piece of the bottom of a plastic garbage can that helps me keep, when I'm throwing it, keeps the clay splashing from. It's called Splash Pan, but it was a homemade one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, these are bat pins. They fit in the top of the middle wheel. And then I'll put one of these. You see there's holes that fit over the bat pin. And it allows me to throw on this bat and then remove it.
What's this made out of, the bat?
It's just particle board.
Okay.
It's 1-inch particle board. I had a friend of mine make these years ago. And eventually the holes will get too big and I have to re-drill them, but these are very old.
So is that a foot pedal that
Yes.
controls speed?
Yes. It's depending on, you see the lights on, meaning there's power. And as I push on it forward, you'll see the wheels start to spin. And the further I go, the faster.
Okay.
So it's sort of like the control on a sewing machine or something, you know, with that variable speed. So are you going to be able to see there?
Yeah, I'll move around.
You can
if I
stand
need
over
to.
there if you want to. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw a basic bowl. I think that's the fastest. And this piece of clay, I try to position it where it's in the center as close as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to center the clay completely. Once it's centered, then I can I'll open it, meaning I'll go down as far as I want the bottom to be thick.
Okay.
And then I'll just gradually pull the clay up with my hands. So the clay is basically centered. You can tell because it's not moving back and forth. Check to
So
see.
just the slightest pressure.
Yeah. Yeah,
creates-
you're actually, the reason this process is called throwing is because as the clay is spinning, the centrifugal force of it turning is throwing the clay against your hand. So that's why it's called throwing. And the way the pressure I use on my hands, whether I'm pushing in or pulling out or whatever, that's determining how the clay will shape, and you'll see how it changes. What I'm doing is I'm checking to see how thick the bottom is.
Okay.
I'm throwing this without my glasses, so I'm hoping everything is okay. I wear just reading glasses because it's one of those close-up things. That,
Yeah. How thick do you like the bottom to be?
Well, The balls that I was throwing, I make them flat. Most of those are just flat on the bottom, and if you do that, you can leave the bottom relatively thin. You want it to be about 1/4 of an inch.
Okay.
If it's going to have a foot rim, meaning if there's going to be a taller base, then you have to allow more so it can be carved out. Now this is the process. What you're watching is the process when I first started learning to throw at Utah State in Logan, Utah. The other students in the studio were all beginning students like me. The biggest challenge is getting the clay centered and being able to pull it up and throw it. There were students in there with me who went through the whole semester and could not get it centered.
Yeah.
So this is not an easy skill to develop.
When I was in high school, I took art, and I was in ceramics for about 3 years, and I had to do this for a whole semester. My first year I had to do it, and in that whole first year, I threw 2 pots correctly, and I still have them. One sits on my desk at work in the office, so it's hard to do.
So where did you go to school?
I grew up in LA, and then
Okay.
that's where I never went on beyond that for art.
Well, I remember at the beginning struggling. It's a skill that is very hard to accomplish because you're training your fingertips and you're training your whole body to almost sense what you're doing. It has to be very subtle changes. So if you put your hands on a piece or take your hands away before it's made a complete circle, the pot will be out of center.
Yeah.
It's important to have water on the clay because that allows your hands to slip over the top, slide. Clay by itself, if you mix water, is a very slick medium. So basically, this thin layer of clay, it's called slip. It's like what you see on my hand. It's very slick. So that's what's allowing me to maneuver the clay without my hands grabbing and throwing it out of. This is a little piece of leather called a chamois, and it absorbs water, and it's going to allow me to kind of finish the bottom and the lip on this thing.
Does it just smooth it out?
It's actually compressing the clay too, so that when if the bottoms are allowed to have water sitting in the bottom, when it dries, it'll crack because there's too much water proportionally. at this point, it only takes a very small amount of pressure to change the shape of the clay because the clay is quite thin now. Last year, in I think it was April, just before we call it school vacation, the school behind me, I actually went over and took my wheel and I gave demos for the kids. There's only 4th, 5th, and 6th grades there, but each class has about 120 kids in. So I was doing demos for the kids, and they thought it was magic.
One of them would have been my son. That's where he goes to school.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did he mention it?
I don't remember, but if he watches this video, he'll go, "Oh, I saw him."
Yeah, he's not as fat as he was last year.
My camera's about to run out of battery, so if we suddenly click out, guys, it's because my battery's almost dead.
This is about the point where it's done. I'm just going to use this metal thing that just gives it a little more control the final shape. But it's pretty much done. What I do now is I will take a little tool and I will cut along the edge, get rid of any excess clay. And then I'll take that same wire that I used to cut the amount of clay and I will cut underneath so that as this dries it will release from the bat. So if I was out here throwing for hours, because these are on a bat, it allows me to pick it up without touching the piece and move, and I would just move it over here out of the way. So, how's your battery holding up?
Who knows? I can't
So
see.
these are very popular with my customers because these are pieces that, you know, once they're finished, these are pieces that people can use for serving. I make smaller ones that are individual, so if people were eating soup or cereal or something. So this is something that, this was no problem to throw this because this is something that will easily sell when my summer starts up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
The pieces, actually, you see these 2 pieces over here, these tall ones? These were 2 of the ones I threw as demos for the school.
Oh yeah.
And also there's a big bowl, it's about this big around, that was the other piece. So I was throwing size to impress the kids. And they enjoyed it. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, in case this dies, I just want to say thanks to Tony for showing us what he does.
And you notice on my walls, I've
Yeah.
written down notes of throughout my career of different things that mean things. So this is definitely a workspace. In the summertime, when I have tourists come in and they want to see my studio, quite often they will ask if they can go out and get their cameras or their phones and photograph the things that I've written.
All the
So
sayings.
I don't even pay attention to it anymore, but a lot of people really enjoy it.
All right. Well, so if you want to grow up to be an artist, this is how you do it. Seems pretty easy, huh? Okay, guys, thanks for coming on this field trip with me, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tony.